All of human history has taken place here.
The only thing we have to fear. One small step for man.
The threat of climate change.
So far. But it's not the only place we could call home.
Mars is the ultimate destination for exploration, the place that we think that's closest to Earth that we can actually reach.
For decades, we've dreamed of being on Mars. Now we're on the brink of going there.
I think if we were to establish a base on Mars, we would be essentially acquiring life insurance for life collectively.
To build an outpost on Mars, we'll need to revolutionize the way we use rockets.
If you want to colonize Mars, you need to be sending as quickly as possible, as many people as possible.
We'll have to learn how to live on a frozen desert planet. And we'll need astronauts willing to risk everything.
The one-way trip is really what makes it possible.
Can we make Mars our new home? Or will we let the universe choose our destiny? It's the solar system's most desirable vacant real estate. Earth adjacent, with ample supplies of water and a convenient 24-hour day. People will live here. It's not a matter of if, but when. This is the revolutionary rocket design that could take us there.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
And yes, it is supposed to stop midair like that. This is the maiden flight of the world's first reusable rocket. If it fails to land back where it started, it could delay the first manned mission to Mars by years. To understand why, you have to understand the radical goals of the company that built it. SpaceX is staffed by young and tech-savvy engineers. Their boss, Elon Musk, has already shaken up 2 established industries with PayPal and Tesla Motors. Now he has his sights set on space and Mars.
The reason for SpaceX is to try to advance the state of rocketry, to improve space transportation to the point where ultimately people can travel to Mars and where we can establish a self-sustaining civilization on Mars.
SpaceX is at the vanguard of a new age of space exploration.
We will work with a growing array of private companies competing to make getting to space easier and more affordable.
It has already won a contract from the US government to supply the space station, slicing costs in half over other rockets. But Elon and his engineers aren't stopping there. They believe reusable rockets will completely transform human access to space.
You can imagine an aircraft were not reusable and you had to buy a new aircraft with every trip, it would be prohibitively expensive to fly. I don't think any Mars base could be established without solving the reusability problem for rockets.
Mars is a hard target because it's so far away. 1,000 times farther than the moon. To get there, astronauts will need enormous amounts of fuel and a massive rocket. Bigger than NASA's Saturn V rocket that took Apollo astronauts to the moon over 4 decades ago.
NASA is working on a heavy lift vehicle right now called the SLS. So they've got a rocket that they intend to launch once every 5 years. Each of those launches every 5 years is going to cost $15 billion. What SpaceX is doing is different. They are working as hard as they can, as fast as they can, to create a heavy lift vehicle at minimum cost, at minimum time.
The huge cost is the main reason NASA has been talking about sending people to Mars for 30 years, but is yet to pull it off. SpaceX's reusable rocket play would slash those costs and bring Mars within reach at long last.
If you imagine that huge rocket stack And at the very top is the capsule that either has people in it or some kind of payload or satellite. Now, the only thing that actually goes to space and continues to be used is that tiny bit at the top. What happens to the rest of the rocket? Well, it simply burns up in the atmosphere. And that's really what we're trying to change, is instead of burning up in the atmosphere, we want to reuse and refly that entire rocket.
SpaceX's new Falcon 9R is designed to jettison its payload and then return to the launch pad, ready to be refueled and launch again within hours. The design team is now counting the days until the all-important first test flight of the Falcon 9R. Their challenge is to safely and accurately bring down a 300-ton rocket that was originally designed only to go up.
For me, the key thing is precision landing. And so if you imagine this rocket was not designed to survive entry with the atmosphere, was not intended to fly, it doesn't have wings. And so we have to find a way to fly it through the atmosphere and to make it have a pinpoint landing right next to where it took off by itself without human guidance.
All right, guys, so this is where the legs will start. This is where they'll be installed, the aero cover and then the landing leg itself. You guys see anything? So some of the biggest challenges to making a rocket reusable, and you have to build it robustly, but you have to make sure you do that in a way that's not super heavy, because weight is money in the rocket industry.
The Falcon 9R will be outfitted not only with a set of legs, but also with a complex guidance system that can direct the angle of its rockets accurately enough for it to make a pinpoint landing.
What about the leg sensors for touchdown? We need to make sure those get in on time. You know what the schedule is with that?
There's a lot to be nervous about. I think this is a brand new landing system.
Now, after more than 2 years of development, test day arrives.
3, 2, 1, 0.
For the first time in the history of rocketry, taking off is the easy part. Our future on Mars depends on whether the Falcon can touch down exactly where it started.
The Falcon 9 rocket is the size of a skyscraper. It's full of rocket fuel, and we're in the middle of Texas. And I'm the one with my finger on the please get down now or please stop doing what you're doing button. So it's scary. Well, this is an absolutely flawless flight. We are so excited about it. What it means is that we can get this rocket and we can land it precisely on a pad. I think this is the start of it. I mean, I think this is us on our way to making reusable rockets.
The Falcon 9R is only powerful enough to get astronauts to the International Space Station. But SpaceX is already working on a scaled-up version, the Falcon Heavy. A reusable heavy-lift rocket could send a spacecraft filled with astronauts to a parking orbit around Earth, and then return for a second trip, delivering a tanker filled with enough fuel to blast them from Earth to Mars. SpaceX sees reusable rockets as not just making a single manned mission to Mars affordable, they will spur a wholesale colonization of the red planet.
The idea is that to get to Mars, you have a very small window of time when the planets align to make it most efficient to get there. So if you want to colonize Mars, you need to be sending as quickly as possible as many people as possible. And you have to be able to refly within hours rather than years.
If we can get the cost of moving to Mars to be under $500,000, and hopefully eventually a lot under $500,000, then I think enough people would be prepared to sell all their stuff on Earth and move to Mars.
Reusable rockets will soon be launching astronauts into orbit in greater numbers than ever before. But there's still a big hurdle between them and Mars. Can they survive the long journey there? A new generation of space engineers is building reusable rockets that will transform how we get into space. Soon, they'll be dispatching manned spacecraft to Mars. But are astronauts tough enough to make this trek? Their capsule, no roomier than a small RV, will have to take a long, sweeping arc around the solar system, slowly creeping out to the orbit of Mars. Even when the planets are favorably aligned, the trip will take at least 6 months. During that time, astronauts will be bombarded with dangerous levels of solar radiation.
On the surface of the Earth, we are protected from space radiation by the Earth's atmosphere. You get away from the Earth, and now you've got no protection. Right now, if we sent a crew to Mars and back, they would receive a radiation dose that is greater than what we allow our astronauts to get.
And spending months on end in zero-G brings other physical risks. Bone loss, muscle loss, and changes in the fluid around the brain could distort the shape of their eyeballs, blurring their vision. But there's one other danger of the long journey to Mars. It could be the biggest threat to any mission. For their entire journey, astronauts will never step outside their cramped quarters and will never get a moment alone.
Okay, so Rachel, I'd like you to begin with just giving me a smile. Excellent. All right, relax back to neutral.
Dr. David Dinges at the University of Pennsylvania studies the impact of prolonged confinement on the mental state of astronauts.
And now, start thinking something negative.
He's designing technology to detect behavioral problems before they spiral out of control.
We're particularly concerned about a severe depression, a severe psychotic reaction, a potential suicidal behavior. We cannot rely on people just to tell us, oh, this is what I'm experiencing, because we know they often don't know it, they can't appreciate it. Many of us struggle to be aware when we're depressed or not feeling well.
To find out if it's humanly possible for a handful of people to spend month after month together in a confined space, David partnered with the Russian Space Agency. Together, they built a mission to Mars that took place entirely in Moscow.
The Institute for Biomedical Problems in Moscow did the bold step to build a spacecraft on the ground with real mission controllers and real people who are like astronauts, engineers, physicians, astronaut trainers from Europe, from Russia, and one from China. 6 of them, males, lived in this chamber for a full mission to Mars, a surfacing, and back, 17 months.
Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! You can take...
1 year ago, on the 3rd of June 2010, we were entering those modules and we didn't leave them for 1 year. And we still have 155 days to go.
It was the longest space simulation ever conducted. For 520 days, the research subjects ate.
That doesn't look so good, but it tastes good, which is the most important.
Slept.
Look at Bunny, he's so relaxed.
And worked.
Yet another day of work in the Mars 500 models.
In one cramped room. David watched their every move.
You can see the active watch here this crew member is wearing, which records light and body motion, and that was critical for detecting the sleep-wake timing of the crew members, how long, and the quality of the sleep. And that was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the entire mission they wore them, and that's why we got over 4 million minutes of data.
The crew was not just physically cut off from the outside. Mission controllers inserted a 20-minute delay each way into all communications with the outside world, even into chats with their families, to simulate being hundreds of millions of miles from home.
The problems started to develop in what's called the second quarter of the mission. Once someone developed an insomnia or a depression, or a problem maintaining sleep timing, or a stress reaction, or feeling tired, or conflicts with ground controllers, it just persisted. And it was cumulative across the rest of the mission. It never got better spontaneously.
When the crew emerged after a year and a half, 4 out of the 6 had significant behavioral problems. David took these depressing results as a challenge. He didn't want the first human colony on Mars to be filled with sociopaths. He vowed to detect mental instability early, so there's a chance to correct it.
The critical goal is to select the optimal crew, and we have to detect when a behavioral deficit occurs in spaceflight and a long mission exploration, and we've got to intervene.
David has developed sophisticated video observation software called optical computer recognition. OCR can read a person's emotions through their facial expressions.
The Optical computer recognition is going to read facial expressions of positive and negative and neutral emotions, and it's going to show these cumulative over time on these lines. So Chris, why don't we begin with just a normal smile for you? And so when that happens, you see right away it says that's a positive expression.
David hopes that any spacecraft headed to Mars would carry this type of software. It would keep track of astronauts' expressions over the weeks and months and watch for any major changes in their mood.
If somebody who smiled 8% of the time over a 3-month period on Earth or in the first part of the mission now is gone through a 4-month period where they've smiled 2%. That would suggest maybe there's a change going on emotionally.
Being technically skilled and physically fit won't be enough to get to Mars in good shape. It will take a giant feat of mental strength and unprecedented teamwork.
Basically, the crew have to operate as a team. They can't let petty issues get in the way. They can't separate into factions and not communicate. They've got to maintain a social structure that is positive. This is far more than what we faced in the past.
Even if the crew can endure the 250 million mile trip, they're still nowhere near safe. Before they step foot on Martian soil, they have to survive the landing. After 6 months in deep space, the first astronauts arrive at Mars. They are moving at around 4 miles a second. The next challenge of their attempt to occupy Mars is approaching fast. They have to land safely. Over the past 40 years, Mars has been a lesson in crash landings. Of the 12 unmanned probes that have entered the Martian atmosphere, 5 have crashed and burned.
It's extremely difficult to land things on Mars. You got to think that you have a several-ton spacecraft that's entering the atmosphere at 6 kilometers per second. You have all this energy that you've built up, and you need to mitigate all that kinetic energy. Otherwise, you'll just splatter and crater and make a big hole in the ground.
On Earth, the thick atmosphere will slow down a speeding spacecraft to around 200 miles an hour. But Mars's atmosphere is 100 times thinner. There's only one way to slow down. Use a really big parachute.
So we're walking down this really long sled. That's what we need to be this long to keep all that.
The job of JPL engineers Ian Clark and Mike Meacham is to prevent crash landings on Mars. Any manned spacecraft will weigh close to 40 tons. For those kind of loads, they'll need a radically new type of parachute.
A year ago, we just landed a 1-ton rover on the surface of Mars, the Curiosity rover. And that took all of the technologies that we've developed over the past 4 decades just to do that. And we've now reached the max of that. The parachute we're testing is designed to hold 100,000 pounds of drag. It's something remarkable considering the parachute itself only weighs about 200 pounds. It's a very light structure. It's made from materials like you would build your camping tent out of, nylon predominantly, with a little bit of Kevlar like we build bulletproof vests out of.
Comes through the back of the sled here around that small pulley. Gotcha. Goes up through this whole structure, through what we call the pipe guide.
Mike Meacham is the mad scientist of the group. It's his job to figure out how to design and test a parachute that won't rip apart at supersonic speeds.
Parachutes that we're looking at testing now are so large, no wind tunnel that exists right now can hold them. They're just not big enough. So we started looking at every possible way you could test a Mars parachute, all the way of hanging it upside down and putting potatoes inside it. We just thought of everything you could possibly do.
What they came up with includes a Nighthawk military helicopter, 4 Mark 70 missile rocket engines, 4,000 feet of rope, and a 30-person support crew. First, the helicopter lifts the 200-pound parachute, trailing a long rope behind it. At 4,100 feet, the chopper releases the parachute and it inflates. At the bottom of the rope is a piece of hardware called the bullet, which must drop into a large funnel at the end of a rocket-powered sled.
So this structure is 50,000 pounds of steel when you add it up. It's got this enormous steel pulley. That's what's doing the real work, actually. In order to react to all that load, we had to pour 2 million pounds of concrete into the ground. That was a picnic. So these concrete anchors you see around you that this structure is bolted down to, they go down 18 feet into the ground.
Once the bullet drops into the funnel, it triggers the rocket sled to fire. Simulating the supersonic speeds the parachute will have to endure on Mars.
We light the outside rockets first. That's our first stage. And that kind of gets this big 100,000-pound sled moving. And once we get up to speed a little bit, we light the inside 2 rockets.
Ian and Mike have run the test once before with a prototype parachute to test the mechanics. The parachute didn't survive, but it didn't need to. That was just a proof of the concept for the system.
Really, the only thing that went wrong during that test was a parachute failure on one of the seams. So as far as the architecture is concerned, it worked perfectly. In some ways, that makes us a little nervous for this next test. You know, it's almost going too well.
You set expectations so high already.
Exactly right.
For Ian and Mike, the stakes couldn't be higher. Our ability to land humans on Mars rests on the success of this test. It's a massive and complicated operation that costs millions. One more thing, there is no plan B. They only have one parachute.
Tonight, I won't be sleeping, for sure. So we've got a 3 a.m. start tomorrow. I'll just be in my bed thinking about it. Extremely nervous. So many different things that have to come together.
Despite the freezing temperatures and early start, the team is already racing to be ready in a couple hours.
Yeah, the adrenaline's definitely up. A lot of things to think about, so try to keep it all in your head and stick to the checklists.
The one thing they can't plan for is the weather. It's imperative they start the test when the winds are the calmest, which is predicted for 7 a.m.
If the winds are too strong, when the helicopter releases the parachute and the parachute begins inflating, the wind could blow the parachute far off course, and our ability to pull the parachute back down towards the ground would be harmed, and we wouldn't be able to do this test safely.
While Ian looks over the parachute, Mike inspects the 4,000 feet of rope attached to it.
The rope is going all the way down this truck, through a couple pulleys, up and over this funnel, and being pulled out this way. So I was just quickly checking for any frays or damage to the rope. I don't see anything, so I think we're good to go.
I'm usually a little bit more relaxed in this, but it's getting close. So it's a little bit of nerves, a little bit of excitement. This whole test, this infrastructure, all the things we've been getting ready for the past year are really associated with, is this parachute strong enough to survive the aerodynamic loads that it needs to in order to operate on Mars?
So yeah, we're all hoping it can hold on.
The helicopter arrives right on time and signals the start of the test.
Clear to test.
Yeah, he's got it. He's got it. Rope's coming up.
It's an agonizing wait for the helicopter to reach 4,100 feet.
Man, he is way up there.
There we go.
3, 2, 1.
It's coming out. It's coming out. Come on, over.
At a naval test facility, NASA engineer Ian Clark and his team are moments away from knowing whether we have the technology to land humans on Mars. Can their parachutes survive the force required to slow down a large spacecraft moving at supersonic speeds?
It's coming out. It's coming out. Backstrip. It's inflating. Wow. That was real smooth inflation. That's a pretty parachute.
We'll see if it stays pretty.
Every second counts now as the parachute fights the increasing wind. If it's blown too far off course, the bullet won't drop into the funnel, and the rocket sled won't engage, making the test a bust.
Okay, we're getting close.
That wind picked up like mad.
The bullet's is at a really wild angle. Come on, over. Uh-oh. Quick. Latch up, latch up. No way, come on. Abort. Damn it. Oh, crapski.
He tried. Bullet hit the ground.
Yep.
What happened?
That wind was just too high. I mean, so it was.
The winch couldn't keep up?
Yeah. So after a while, the winch just can't keep up.
Yeah.
It's a frustrating failure for the team. It takes weeks to repack the parachute and months to coordinate the location and helicopter, so they won't be able to try again for at least a year.
It was a good try.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great.
It's the nature of technology development. You're always trying new things. You're coming up with new solutions. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But you have to learn from that. If you really do want to advance, the state of the art, then you're going to have setbacks like this. You learn from them and you move on.
The unpredictability of Earth's weather is nothing compared to what we'll face on Mars. Even if astronauts survive the landing, they'll be greeted by an environment that's highly hostile. The average temperature hovers around minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The atmosphere, composed mostly of unbreathable carbon dioxide, is over 100 times thinner than Earth's. Exposed body liquids like saliva and tears would boil away here. No astronaut can spend even a moment outside without a spacesuit. But doing the work of building a colony on Mars will require a spacesuit that doesn't rob them of their dexterity.
So how you feeling? I mean, it feels really good. Try and touch, but actually I feel like the hip mobility is really good. Gets a little bit tighter up in the shoulders.
Aerospace engineer and MIT professor Deva Newman and her team of students are developing a revolutionary new spacesuit called the biosuit.
T-Design, you want to open it up?
Yeah, we can check it out inside.
Apollo-era spacesuits were bulky, making even the simplest tasks difficult to perform. The moon's weak gravity made that 200-pound suit feel like it only weighed 30 pounds. But Mars' gravity, although still weaker than Earth's, won't be as forgiving.
The moon is 1/6 gravity, Mars is 3/8 gravity. So if you're in a 3/8 gravity environment, you need a much lighter suit, much lighter system, and they're not very mobile.
Current NASA spacesuits surround astronauts in a bag of pressurized air and force them to spend the majority of their energy fighting against their own inflated garments. But Deva is developing a radically different suit, one that is skin tight.
The only other way to keep an astronaut alive is to apply the pressure directly to the skin. It seemed like a pretty crazy idea. Can you shrink wrap an astronaut? And it's technically feasible, we think. And to set out to make a Spider-Man looking suit, we just, as engineers, kind of follow the math. The black lines, I think about that as a soft exoskeleton. It's more structural. And so they're not going to extend as she moves. This is not going to extend.
A light, form-fitting suit will make it easier for astronauts to move around on Mars. But some tasks, like clearing boulders from a construction site, they require serious physical effort. Brad Holshoe is trying to design muscle power directly into the biosuit. He's using an advanced material known as a shape memory alloy.
So what we have here is a shape memory alloy spring. It's a metal that's comprised of part nickel, part titanium, and it has a very unique feature that you can teach it to remember a certain shape. And all it takes is heat to stimulate them to recover the shape that you've taught it. And what I'll do, we'll fire up the load cell, and we can see what kind of force it's actually going to produce. Like you can see it's already starting to pull in.
Yeah. Wow.
It's actually
That's
contracting.
a nice response, yeah?
Yep.
Excellent.
What's cool about that is that if you think about what's happening, this is contracting just like a human muscle does. And so you can take one of these or several of these and put them in parallel, and all of a sudden you have a muscle that you can work with.
Donning a spacesuit used to slow astronauts down. With a rack of muscle-enhancing biosuits and the reduced gravity of Mars, colonists will be able to build our extraterrestrial outpost faster than they could in an Earth-like environment.
If I need to be in this position for a long time, anyone, even here on the surface of the Earth, gets tired. And so what you would be able to do, actually, is add some stiffness through these lines using that soft exoskeleton concept and be able to offload some of the weight of my body rather than using my muscles to kind of flex and hold me here. And so that would actually reduce fatigue.
But bringing technology from Earth isn't enough to build a lasting civilization on Mars. To thrive there, we need to go native, to find and make use of the natural resources of Mars.
I need to go and check out sampling locations for my work, so if you need to get hold of me, only start worrying if I don't come back in 20 minutes, okay?
Sure.
If Lewis and Clark had tried to cross the American continent, bringing with them all the food, water, and air that they and their horses would need for a 3-year transcontinental trip, they never would have been able to do it. They were able to do it because they were using the resources that were available in the environment they intended to operate in. That's how we have to do Mars. Travel light, live off the land.
Learning how to live on a barren, frozen planet is the purpose of this bold experiment based in the remote wilds of the Utah desert. Getting to Mars and surviving in its harsh environment will stretch our technology and human endurance to the limit. When we went to the moon, NASA tested its abilities gradually. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin spent only a few hours on the moon. By Apollo 17, astronauts stayed for more than 3 days. But we can't take baby steps when we go to Mars. We only have the rocket power to get there when Earth and Mars are favorably aligned. Once a crew touches down, it will have to wait 1.5 years before the planets are once again aligned for the return trip. We can't take enough food and water for such a long stay. We have to learn how to live off the land on a barren, frozen planet. To find out if that's possible, a crew of 7 scientists, engineers, and students from around the world are living in isolation on a remote base in Utah called the Mars Desert Research Station.
Right, good morning, everyone. You all got enough coffee in you?
Yeah.
Everyone sleep okay? Yeah? All right. Susan, how's the medical EVA looking today?
It's looking quite good. I think I've assigned the people that I want to come with me.
There's a proper assessment, a head-to-toe assessment that we're going to do in the field. The challenge is going to be that we have a spacesuit on.
The Mars Society, which I lead, has practice Mars stations, one in the Arctic and one in the American desert, where we send crews out there for various length of times, usually 2 weeks, but we've had them as long as 4 months. We're hoping to do a 1-year mission. And we task them to do a sustained program of field exploration while operating as if they're on Mars.
This is the size of home sweet home for those 18 months. The crew eats, sleeps, and works inside this cramped 1,300 square foot habitat with only the barest essentials.
We have special diets. There's all dehydrated food, so you have to be very creative as a cook because it's a 2-week mission.
The crew tightly rations water use. Showers are rare luxuries.
We want to really feel, live, and act like we are living on Mars so that we can build this model one day for us to literally live on Mars itself.
No one can leave the hab without wearing a spacesuit.
Okay.
And if someone gets sick or injured on Mars, there's no going home for treatment. Complex medical procedures would have to be guided by specialists on Earth on a 20-minute delay.
So that's
the important thing is to make.
So this actually is what
the important direction.
This may all seem like dress up for space enthusiasts, but this simulation has a vital purpose. It's developing the critical technology we need to survive on Mars, extracting water from what looks like a desert.
Mars looks actually dry and arid, but the most surprising fact is we have found water. Water, which is the main important life source for humans.
Aeronautical engineer Vibha Srivastava is heading out to collect samples of the Utah desert soil, which is a surprisingly good match for Martian soil.
The soil composition is a little bit rich in iron, which is quite similar to the one in the Martian surface.
Apart from at the poles, there is no ice on the surface of Mars. However, water does exist, bound up in the minerals of the soil. Vibha's challenge is to get it out.
My idea is to find if there is any stable water content below the top surface layer.
Yeah, it looks like the sun is nearly set. We should really wrap up now and head back soon.
Yeah, I agree.
We don't want to be wandering around in the dark.
Back at the hab, Vibha begins the process of trying to pull water from the dirt.
I collected some nearly 500 grams of sample, and we're going to put it in our equipment and see how much of the water the equipment is able to extract.
She heats the soil in a sealed cooker. An air blower will direct any water vapor into a steel tube, where it will cool and with luck, condense into liquid water.
So this is the amount of water that we have collected from the sample, and it's a good news because the experiment works. The water may not be drinkable yet. We need to do some testing because there's a possibility that other salts or there could be some other mixed liquids in the water.
Vibha's proof of concept experiment shows it's possible to make water on Mars. Extracting water from Mars will allow astronauts to grow crops in greenhouses, paving the way for long-term human occupation of the red planet.
Mars has on it all the resources necessary for life and therefore technological civilization. And if we can go to Mars in our time and establish that first little foothold, that first little Plymouth Rock on Mars, then 500 years from now, there will be a new branch, maybe several new branches of human civilization on Mars.
But these first colonists will face one more challenge, and it's the most daunting of all. Their journey to Mars may be a one-way trip.
The difficulty of a Mars mission is the fuel and supplies you need to return. You know, for every pound of fuel that you need to launch off of Mars, you have to launch 30 or 50 or 70 pounds of propellant off the Earth just to get the propellant to Mars to propel you back.
This problem is at the heart of why we aren't on Mars today. The technology needed to pull off the return trip is still many years away.
It gets an awful lot easier if you don't have to come home. And suddenly the mission becomes much more doable. But now you need people who are ready to commit to spend the rest of their lives in a small enclosed cabin in an environment that will kill them in 3 seconds if they step outside.
Believe it or not, people are signing up to do just that. And one entrepreneur claims he can get them there sooner than anyone else.
There are many reasons I want to go to Mars.
We're close to having the technology to get ourselves to Mars and to begin building a colony there. But NASA and SpaceX's plans for humans on Mars are at least 2 decades out because they are missing one crucial piece of the puzzle: getting people back. Baz Lansdorp, founder of a space exploration corporation called Mars One, plans to put humans on Mars as soon as 2024. A shortcut? Not offering the return trip as an option.
Mars One is doing a mission of permanent settlement, a one-way trip, because the one-way trip is really what makes it possible.
Baz recognized that the way to begin colonizing Mars in our lifetime is to eliminate the enormous complexities of the return trip to Earth.
If you want humans to go to Mars anytime soon, then there's no alternative to a mission of permanent settlement, because it's so complex to do a return mission. Even if there was a return rocket ready on Mars, I think I would still be organizing a mission of permanent settlement, because if you settle on Mars, then it's really the next giant leap for mankind.
Mars One is working with Lockheed Martin to build its one-way spacecraft. But it has an even bigger challenge. Who on Earth would volunteer to spend the rest of their lives in a space the size of an RV on a toxic planet?
I would like to go to Mars because it has been a dream of mine for as long as I can remember.
I have a broad education in both science and engineering.
Why do I want to go to Mars? So that's my sense of humor.
I will be, I promise you this, the funniest girl on Mars. Unless you invite Ellen DeGeneres, and in that case, I'll be second.
You know, I like to do silly dances.
I play volleyball, I snowboard, scuba dive.
Live long and prosper.
We're looking for people with the right psychology, mostly. Of course, they have to be healthy, they have to be smart, because we have to teach them a lot of new skills.
Baz plans to raise money for the trip by selling the rights to a reality TV show shot on Mars. He has already received over 200,000 applicants and is in the process of whittling that down to 24 finalists. Meade McCormick was just selected as a semifinalist.
So you live in Los Angeles. What do you do?
Well, I'm a recent graduate of California Institute of the Arts.
Do you have a lot of contact with your family?
Yeah, I do. I talk to my mother probably every day, every other day, my dad, and I don't have any siblings, so it's just them, really.
Yeah. How would you feel about never seeing them again?
The Mars One astronauts will spend 10 years training in teams of 4 before they blast off. After a couple of years setting up a Martian base, they'll be joined by a second crew.
The early years, there will be a lot of work in construction, So especially the first months, there's interconnecting the modules, deploying solar panels, installing the greenhouse equipment. On Mars, you'll have very limited water, so maybe you can't shower for a couple of years. You'll have to grow your own food. You'll spend a lot of time on that. Is that something that you fear?
No, because it's all part of the experience. Because every 100 feet you take is a whole new experience, a whole new explorer. You're the first person there, something new is there. So everything we do is going to be new and exciting.
A lot of people are so surprised when they hear that people are actually interested in a mission of permanent settlement, a one-way trip. But don't forget that this has been going on throughout the history of our planet. We started in one location and spread all over the world. Do you think it's crazy to leave everything behind?
I do think it's crazy, but like I said, I think we have to be able to do these crazy things in order to push progress in this world.
Throughout the millennia, we've called dreamers crazy before they accomplish their feat. Then we call them heroes. 100 years from now, they could be the founding fathers of a thriving, self-sufficient human colony on Mars.
In the establishment of the United States, many, many people died. And they knew that the chance of death was much higher than if they just stayed home, in most cases.
It's something that this period of history is called upon to do. I mean, I believe that this time will be remembered because this is when we first set sail for other worlds. And so I think we will.
There are great risks and technological hurdles, but nothing is stopping us from going to Mars. Mars is our destiny because our greatest achievements are not behind us. They are always one step beyond.
If you're going to Mars to stay, then that's really a step in our evolution. It's the next giant leap for mankind, and it makes it into something that's expanding on what humankind has been doing for the last 50,000 years.
The first person to step on Mars is alive today. Is it your brother? Your cousin? Is it you?